The Dead in Their Graves by Sarah J Dhue. Constable! Another one's done gone missing, Officer Greer shouted over the rain, holding onto his umbrella for dear life in the wind. The whole neighborhood is in an uproar. They say there's something out of that necropolis what done it. Yes, I've heard what the people say, the constable stated, clearly a skeptic. Then you know, the place, well, it creeps, sir. Doesn't stay within its walls. They say it's something to do with those Selwoods what owns the place. Old blood. Very old blood in this town. Don't you know, they say... Greer dropped his voice and could no longer be heard over the pounding rain. Well, speak up, man, the constable shouted impatiently. They say, Greer stammered, fiddling with the handle of his umbrella, that some generations ago, they done opened a gateway to the dead in one of those mausoleums. Preposterous, the constable huffed, adjusting his cape and helmet. Why, I've never heard such a name drivel, especially not from educated men, such as yourself. Now, constable, I tell you, I'm no superstitious prat. I don't just believe every hysterical woman, but I've lived in this town my whole life, and there's always been something about those Selwoods, and that place. He nodded toward the necropolis. We'll get to the bottom of it all right. Constable walked down the 2 steps from the police station entrance to the street. The rain had slowed to a light drizzle. We'll find those missing persons and prove once and for all that there's nothing to fear from the dead in their graves. Greer's eyes widened. Sir, you can't mean... I intend to go into that necropolis tonight and put any superstitions to rest. And if, mark my words, if those people are anywhere in that place, I will find them and who took them there. They'll have me to answer to and an overnight stay in this very jail. He pointed over his shoulder with his thumb. But, constable, surely you don't mean to go there at night? I do indeed. I believe I made my intentions quite clear. I've had enough of this nonsense. The rumors get dispelled tonight. The constable looped his thumbs through his belt, his baton swinging at his hip. He took a few more steps down the cobblestone street, then looked over his shoulder to see Greer rooted to the spot. Well, come along, Greer. Me, sir, Greer squeaked, his head retreating between his shoulders and his eyes widening. Why, yes, you. The constable removed his thumbs from his belt and placed his hands on his hips. I can't, sir. Can't? Or won't? Greer hesitated, then spoke. I won't go there, sir. Not at night. He shook his head, lowering and collapsing his umbrella, visibly shaking. Are you daft? You, an educated member of society. It's just a cemetery, man. Like I said, there's nothing to fear from the dead in their graves. Greer shook his head again. No, sir. I'm not the one who's daft. I told you, I've lived in this town my whole life, and that place has never been right. Who's to say the dead there are in their graves, as you say? The constable stared at him in shock, his mouth hanging slightly agape under his impressive mustache, trying to wrap his head around such irrational claims. So, you won't come? No, sir. The constable stood there a moment longer, then turned back in the direction of the necropolis. Then I'll go alone, he stated, unwavering in his resolve, starting toward the ancient burial place. God be with you, constable, Greer said after him quietly, feeling some modicum of shame for letting him go alone, as well as guilt for thinking his superior to be a fool. Plonkers. Prats. The whole lot of them. The constable grumbled under his breath as he made his way down the street toward the Selwood's necropolis, his boots echoing on the cobblestone. The rain had stopped, leaving everything shrouded in a misty fog. The front gate of the necropolis appeared through the haze, looming over the constable. Everard had been a policeman most of his adult life, but just a Scotland Yard bobby in London until he had caught word of a vacancy in a small country town. While he did not dislike London, he felt that he would never have any real sense of authority there, treading water with all of the other lackeys. So, he had left and come here to this seemingly peaceful hamlet of a town to keep the streets safe as their constable, and he had done well. That is, until the disappearances. The walls that surrounded the necropolis were stone masonry, old and crumbling in places, yet steadfast. The front gate was set in black iron, closed but never locked. Not that it needed to be locked, as the whole town held a superstition about the place and the family who owned it. Despite this superstition, the dead were still buried there, but only under the safety of the sun in broad daylight. A chill nipped at the nape of Everard's neck, but he shrugged it off. He was not afraid. Not of goblins and specters, anyway. He patted his baton on his hip. If he did encounter anyone else among the tombstones and mausoleums, he'd be ready to deal out a good walloping. He surveyed the area around the front gate before moving forward and noticed a darkened area not far from the ingress, like a smear, leading inside. The rain had mostly washed away whatever had been there, and the rest was obscured by the fog. Everard knelt, trying to swipe away some of the mist to get a better look, but not having much luck. Could it be blood? Then again, it could be anything. Hard to tell in the dark. He inwardly cursed himself for not bringing a lantern, but he also had not wanted anyone dubious to see him coming. He stood and approached the gate, gripping it with purpose and pushing it slowly to prevent it from letting out a loud creak and alerting anyone to his presence. The rain, in this regard at least, had worked in his favor, as the slippery gate opened with no resistance or sound. As he stepped through the gate, the air seemed to whisper a sigh, a breeze distorted through the ornate Gothic windows cut into the mausoleums flanking the entrance, and creating a path through the cemetery. Everard looked down at his boots, deciding if he should attempt to follow the ever-fading trail of stain or merely wander the rows. He chose the former, despite being unsure that it was blood or in any way related to the most recent disappearance. It at least gave him something to follow. He began creeping along, almost on tiptoe, following the trail in the murk. Every time the wind swelled, he froze, listening, for it gave the illusion of voices in the dark. Imagination, the mind looking for patterns in everything, like seeing shapes in the clouds. That was all it was. He would walk every row, ears alert, and be able to say without a doubt whether there was anyone here who should not be. The smear had vanished, at least from his sight in the dark, and so the constable walked up one row and then down the next, ensuring that he did not miss any section of the spanning necropolis. Of course, there were some sections that did not run perfectly parallel, and he found himself having to make sure if he were walking the same route twice. Then again, better to walk the same way than not at all. As he neared the heart of the necropolis, he heard a sound. This time not just a sigh on the wind, but a sort of shuffling and gurgling? He neared a large, domed marble apse encasing a stone bench and several graves. It was there that he spotted a movement behind the graves and bench. A man stooped over, kneeling over something on the ground. Everard's first impression had been that he had dropped something and was groping for it in the dark. However, as he drew nearer, the man looked up at him, the lower half of his face smeared in something and his hands cupped as though he were eating. He looked familiar, and it took the constable a moment to put his finger on the name. Milton Selwood. But he looked off somehow. Everard squinted in the dark, trying to see if he could determine what it was that Milton was eating behind the bench, when another figure moved in his periphery, accompanied by a voice. Constable? What are you doing here so late at night? That voice. The constable knew it. It belonged to Milton Selwood. But how could it, when Milton knelt on the ground before him? He turned to look at the other figure, and despite it being dark, he could make out the visage of Milton Selwood, with nothing off kilter about him like the man stooped beneath the apse. Everard cleared his throat. There's been another disappearance, Mr. Selwood. He looked between the two men and chose to keep his eyes on Milton. Some seem to think those disappearances are the fault of something in here. I am wanting to put rumor and conjecture to rest and conduct a thorough investigation. Yes, I've heard these rumors. Troubling. Milton stroked his clean-shaven upper lip and jaw. His eyes darted to the man kneeling on the ground and then back to the constable. Don't pay Alger here any mind. He's an old member of the family, and not quite in his right mind. His statement struck Everard as odd, since the man before him was nearly the spitting image of Milton, not looking a day over 40. What are the two of you doing out here so late? Everard asked, the wind whistling through the structures once more, seeming to whisper a desperate plea for him to get out. Well, we do own these grounds, then don't we? Milton replied, guarded, watching the constable for response. As I say, I am simply trying to carry out an investigation. On my property. No matter, I shall answer your question. Milton walked as he talked, positioning himself between the constable and Alger. As I've said, Alger here is not feeling well, so he needed some fresh air. Consequently, I needed to check the crematorium. We've been having trouble stoking the fires of late. Perhaps that is somehow tied to the disappearances? Someone using your facilities to cast blame. I shall check them with you, Selwood, Everard said. It was not a request, but an edict. Yes, perhaps. Milton nodded slowly and began walking in the direction Everard had been headed. Are we all right to leave Alger? Everard asked. He'll be along shortly. Best now to leave him to himself. As they passed by on their way to the crematorium, Everard could have sworn he saw Alger's leg jutting out from underneath him at a most impossible angle. Just how old is Alger? Everard asked as they neared a tall, rectangular brick structure with several smokestacks lining the flat roof. Milton chuckled. Quite old. I know, he does not look it, but then again, he does look quite well for someone born in 1643. He pushed open the crematorium's heavy door, sending a shrill creak through the silent night. The constable nearly tripped, stumbling on his words as he grappled to form a coherent sentence. Excuse me? I must have misheard you. There is no way you said that he was born in 1643. Why, that'd make him 248, 249 years old? Yes, I know, Milton grinned as if enjoying some private joke at the constable's expense. He would be that old, had he not died first in 1681. He walked among the doors to the chambers. Are you implying that Alger has come back from the dead? Everard felt a lump form in his throat, his tongue going dry. Such things were nonsense, folly, and yet here in these walls of death on a lonesome night, they seemed somehow credible. I am not implying anything. I am telling you that it is so, Milton said nonchalantly, as if this were everyday talk for him. He turned on his heels to face the constable, who stood in the center of the room, shoulders slumped, staring stupidly at nothing. Some adjust well, while others need a little help regaining their humanity. Their humanity? Everard said. His cynicism had returned, as he had stood listening to Milton Selwood talk about bringing back the dead as casually as if they were speaking about the weather. Well, to call them zombies would be crude, Milton nodded. But they have come back from elsewhere, from an ether beyond our understanding, from a realm unlike this world you and I live in. So yes, to readjust to being human can be fiddly. Milton walked toward the constable. You know, there is some truth to the rumors you heard. My family opened a gateway to the dead a long time ago, right here in this very necropolis, in this very building, before it was used as a crematorium. Everard heard the door close behind him with a loud thud, and turned to see other members of the Selwood family standing just inside. Bertram, Emerson, Cyril, Adeline, Bee, Imogen, Alger, and others that he did not recognize. Death is always surrounded by such tragedy, such sadness, even when it is a peaceful passing. Why shouldn't there be a chance to subvert that tragedy, to get it right this time? A second chance. At what cost? Everard practically squeaked. The wind blew again, and he could hear the phantom chanting of rituals past, not in his mind, but here and now, in this very place. Humanity comes at a steep price, Constable. My family, however, is ready to pay it. We have been paying it for generations, Milton replied. Realization dawned on the constable, a little too late. The trail he had seen had been blood. The leg he had seen jutting out from under Alger had not been his own, but that of the latest victim, and he should have listened to Greer more keenly when he bade him not go into the necropolis alone in the dark of night. The chanting grew louder, a joining across time of those who had first opened the gateway and those who stood in the room now, slowly closing a circle around him.